6 days of deliberations now and still no verdict in the case of accused drug kingpin Carlos Lehder. Prosecutors say Lehder is a leader of Colombia's notorious Medellin drug cartel, and he's being tried in Jacksonville, Florida, on charges of smuggling in more than 3 tons of Colombian cocaine. Today, the judge let jurors review videotapes of interviews with Lehder. On those tapes, he denies any cocaine trafficking, but he does call drugs a weapon against imperialism.
Houses and his marina. The decision by the same Florida jury that convicted Lehder yesterday of smuggling tons of cocaine into the United States while using his property on a Bahamian island as headquarters. So the jurors decided the property should be seized so others won't take over the same operation.
Good evening. Federal prosecutors nailed a big one today in the continuing war on cocaine. They got a guilty verdict in the Florida trial of Carlos Lehder, the most powerful Colombian drug dealer ever brought to trial in this country. NBC's Brian Ross has been on the trail of Lehder for a long time, and tonight he describes the significance of this conviction and the challenges still before U.S. narcotics officials.
The jury of 8 women and 4 men deliberated for 7 days under extraordinarily heavy security after former Miami policemen working for Lehder were spotted following jurors to their homes. Just before noon today, the jury returned its verdict, finding Lehder guilty on all 11 counts of drug smuggling, involving more than 3 tons of cocaine smuggled into Florida and Georgia. In his closing argument, the U.S. Attorney, Robert Merkel, holding up one of Lehder's submachine guns and standing next to a cart loaded with cocaine, said Lehder had built his drug empire on a Bahamian island, Norman's Key, using violence and corruption. More than 100 witnesses testified against Lehder, including one of Lehder's most important drug pilots, Andrew Barnes.
We could fly out of Norman's Key with a load of coke back then and be almost 100% guaranteed of flying straight into the U.S., no matter how you did it, without being tailed.
Some of the most damaging evidence against Lehder came from Lehder himself, a flamboyant and erratic personality who admired Adolf Hitler and who talked openly about his drug activities in this 1985 interview in the jungles of Colombia, at a time when Lehder had allied himself with leftist guerrillas.
Cocaine and marijuana has become a revolutionary weapon against American imperialism.
And the jury was shown films that the Colombian drug boss had made at his Bahamian drug base, the remote island of Norman's Key, which Lehder tried to pass off as a jet-set resort. The prosecutors even produced a photograph of Lehder snorting cocaine on Norman's Key. It took 6 years and millions of dollars to capture Lehder, bring him to trial, and convict him. But today's conviction is not likely to do much to really disrupt the huge cocaine business.
5576.
Authorities say the well-protected cocaine smuggling routes that Lehder pioneered through the Bahamas are still being used to smuggle tons of cocaine into this country. But Prosecutor Merkel says the verdict sends a message to the other drug bosses in Colombia.
This has got to shake them a little bit. It's got to shake them a lot. And it will disrupt their peace of mind, certainly, if not their actual logistical method of transporting cocaine, because they're going to be looking over their shoulder, and they know that we're coming after them.
Lehder's lawyers say they will appeal, but with today's verdict, the most important Colombian drug boss ever put on trial now faces the prospect and the possibility of spending the rest of his life in an American prison. Tom?
Brian, shaking the peace of mind of the drug smugglers is one thing, but what's happening down there in the meanwhile to the drug production?
Tom, it's still boom time in Colombia for the bosses in Medellin who have left Carlos Lehder behind. They're doing just fine. There are now an estimated 250,000 new acres of coca leaf under cultivation in Colombia. The only problem they have down there now is finding enough pilots to get the drugs up to this country.
All right, thank you very much. Brian Ross in Washington tonight. And while Carlos Lehder has been brought to justice, Panama's General Manuel Noriega remains in power. He's been identified, of course, as a major drug trafficker as well, and the Reagan administration now is willing to drop drug charges against him if he'll leave power.